everybody. Well, I bet you can't tell from this picture that I was born in the last year of the Great Famine in China. These chubby cheeks are proof of privilege. For the first 5 years of my life, I lived in this large house with my parents, my maternal grandparents, and my brother Chase. And every Sunday, we visited our paternal grandparents who lived 3 bus stops away. My parents are doctors, and so were their fathers. And Chase and I, we were supposed to follow their footsteps when we grew up. But the Cultural Revolution began when I was 5, and everything turned upside down. All my grandparents, who studied in England and in America, were accused of being foreign spies and counter-revolutionaries. My maternal grandfather, a very renowned neuropharmacologist and a very proud man, didn't want to confess to crimes that he had never committed, decided to take his own life when I was 6. I remember being woken up by a lot of commotion that night. The maid came to stay with me and then took me to school the next morning. When I came home in the afternoon, there were many strangers in the house, and my mother took me to the kitchen and told me Grandpa had died. That was the first time I had ever seen an adult cry, so I was extremely frightened. And then she took me to see my grandma, sitting silently in a darkened room with all the curtains drawn, and she looked exhausted from crying. That was the single most vivid memory of my childhood. Everything else seems fuzzy and vague compared to that day. By the time I was about 8, 5 families moved into our house. My grandmother and I squeezed into one tiny little room, and my parents and Chase lived in the room next to us. And that was when I got to spend a lot of time with my grandmother. Whenever I was sick from school, she would unlock her little closet and bring out a suitcase full of forbidden goodies, old pictorials, linguaphone phonographs. Linguaphone is a British language teaching institute. Linguaphone records or playbills from West End, Broadway, and then she would venture into stories, recounting or recreating tragic sagas from works like Wuthering Heights, Hamlet, or funny stories from Pickwick Papers. It's usually winter when I was sick with the cold or the flu. She would close all the heavy drapery and crank up the phonograph to play linguaphone for me. More than 40 years have passed, and I can still close my eyes and hear the authoritative British male voice. Lesson number 1. This is my family. My wife, my son, my daughter and I. I am standing by the window smoking a pipe. My son is kneeling on the floor playing with a train. That taught me English. It was really brazen and defiant of my grandma to have kept that suitcase of contraband and share the contents with me in the midst of the Cultural Revolution. I think it was behind closed doors in her darkened room that with a fever and sore throat, that I first began to conjure up images of faraway lands and sounds of unfamiliar tongues. Intuitively, I sensed that life might be more than the monotonous indoctrination that I was fed in school and by the world around me. My grandma's stories balanced my education. And the Linguaphone records gave me enough English foundation for me to pass the English examination for the entrance examination. College entrance examination back then was very difficult for the Shanghai Foreign Language Institute. My grandmother's talent for storytelling and as a charming conversationalist also helped me in unexpected ways. In my late teens, I became a sort of a national darling, a communist poster girl for having starred in a few movies. And so there were constantly gentlemen callers who would come to our door with the desire to meet me. And according to my grandmother, they were all sons or grandsons of various high-level cadres. She said they were trouble. I should not meet any of them. And so as I sat in the bathroom or the kitchen with a book, she would be chatting with the visitor over a cup of tea or a cigarette. Scheherazade may have told 1,001 tales to save her own life. And my grandmother told 1,001 tales to spare me the trouble and to have some fun for herself. Some suitors, disappointed at hearing that I wasn't home, would leave right away, but others would stay for quite a while, chatting and laughing with my grandma, genuinely enjoying her conversation, her company. I think she must have appeared to be this really exciting and maverickle lady to them. Many remained her friends and completely forgot that their initial intentions of meeting me. Being a Chinese movie star in the late 70s and early 80s was nothing more than inconvenient. I was constantly mobbed on the streets, but there were absolutely no any other perks to speak of. You know, I was getting 18 yuan a month like any other workers in a factory. But by leaving high school early, I did avoid the terrible fate of being sent down to the remote countryside with other students. So this is a picture of high school graduates or middle school graduates being sent down to remote countryside to be re-educated by peasants. For 10 years, kids were being sent down. And because I went to act, I didn't graduate, so I didn't get sent down. But all these people, throughout my childhood and my adolescence, I always hear my parents were always strategizing, you know, how to keep my brother and me in Shanghai. So my brother here, my brother Chase was a very sensitive and poetic boy who loved drawing and painting, but my father was determined to mold him into a professional athlete to avoid being sent down. My father knew a swimming coach who could train him. So Chase first trained in swimming, then in water polo, and finally found his best sport in rowing. So just like 1 month before his graduation from high school, she won third place in Shanghai and just barely made the cut to become a professional rower. And that's how my brother and I got to remain in Shanghai while many of our friends, classmates, neighbors were sent down. So for years, their stories would travel back to us. So-and-so was caught stealing food from the peasants and almost beaten to death, and so had a botched abortion, is now sterile, so married the son of the village head and would now never return to Shanghai. So decades later, on the other side of the earth, on the other side of the Pacific, right here, I was still haunted and fascinated by the life that I had avoided by chance and luck. Chase had avoided by design and effort. At gatherings with my Chinese friends, we would often talk about those years. Some of them were sent down themselves for many years. So a writer friend of mine told me a story about one sent down girl whom she knew. Her name is Xiu. And later, we adapted that story into my directorial debut, Xiu the Sent Down Girl. Xiu symbolized my generation's blind zeal for the Cultural Revolution, the heavy sacrifices we suffered, and our ultimate disillusion. So because of censorship issues, I had to shoot in hiding without a government permit. And that took us to the Tibetan High Plateau near Hongyuan County, which was one of the poorest regions in China. I remember calling my husband from Chengdu, the last city where I could make an international phone call before embarking on this journey of guerrilla filmmaking. I cried and I said I had no idea what I was doing. And I said that I didn't expect to survive this perilous undertaking. And he told me, he said, you could just turn back. No one would love you any less for stopping. And his comforting words were reassuring words, were just the thing that I needed to carry on with my crazy mission. I thought of my grandmother, whose brazen defiance and passion for storytelling were coursing through my veins as I ventured into the unknown. At 4,000 meters where we were filming, air was thin, breathing was difficult, and there was no Four Seasons. We had no vegetables except for onions, and no showers in the hostel where we stayed. And after a couple of weeks of shoot, I would return to my room, I opened the door, and I would smell the onion, the butter tea, the boiled mutton, and the general mustiness that I realized it was me. So on top of all that, we also, there was the constant threat of being discovered by the authorities and being arrested and expelled. So that was the film, one of the frame from the film. And this film really was the hardest thing I had ever done, but also the most gratifying and memorable. We were far from modern civilization, and I was experiencing everything with the heightened awareness as if I was in love. My senses were livened by what writer John Steinbeck called glory. It flashes in your brain and the whole world glows outside your eyes. Or what writer-producer Shonda Rhimes called a hum. It begins in the brain, and it grows, and the hum sounds like the open road, and you could drive it forever. I think they were talking about the origin of all creativeness, and I am lucky that I have encountered it in more or lesser forms throughout my career. This was at the Golden Horse Awards. So Xiu, the Sent Down Girl, went on to win many international awards, including 7 Golden Horse Awards. And I was honored by the National Board of Review with a International Freedom of Speech Award. But most important for me was, the proudest for me was that I told the story I needed to tell. And I stayed true to my vision, albeit with a heavy price. I was banned from China for 3 years after the release of the film. In his commemoration of American poet Robert Frost, President Kennedy said, if art is to nourish the roots of our culture, society must set the artist free to follow his vision wherever it takes him. We must never forget that art is not a form of propaganda, it is a form of truth. In free society, art is not a weapon, and it does not belong to sphere of polemic and ideology. The highest duty the writer, the composer, the artist is to remain true to himself and let the chips fall where they may. The speech resonates a great deal with me. I grew up in a communist system where there was a very narrow range of political correctness. Everything outside that zone is to be silenced. And because of this background, I am always leery of ultra-political correctness that might stifle freedom of speech. Stereotypes are not inherently untrue or malicious, though they can be as malignant as cancer. Their danger lies in their one-dimensional quality, its incompleteness. However, no one can fill in the blanks. No one can complete our stories for us. Only we can. And the best way to repudiate a single story told about us by the dominant culture is to tell 1001 of our own tales, such as these: Wedding Blanket Joyla Club, Saving Face, Fresh Off the Boat, Last Caution, Crouching Tiger and Hidden Dragon, Last Emperor. These deeply rich and human stories that will touch people viscerally, that will relate and unite us to all humanity. As Socrates famously said, the secret to change is to focus all your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. Last but not least, I would like to express how proud I am to be a fellow member of this great organization. You are a great inspiration for me all the time. Your contributions to society, your concern for justice help make sure that our nation does not fall short of its highest potential. Thank you.